Greetings, dear viewers. This is George from Ireland, and I'm continuing my series about the Irish oppression myth. So I've taken aim at some of the mythology which is propagated by nationalists and Republicans in Ireland. Some of these are in no particular order: that we were occupied, that a high majority of people were against being connected to Great Britain, that sectarianism is completely from Great Britain, that the record of the Crown forces in Ireland is atrocious, that most English, Welsh and Scots people were anti-Irish, that we were oppressed. I could go on and on. Now, not all of these contentions are entirely false, but often they are exaggerated or they're decontextualized, and not enough of an allowance is made for the era at the time, and wrongdoing by nationalists and Republicans is overlooked, or anti-Catholicism is inflated, and it was definitely there, and there were anti-Catholic murders and so on, whereas anti-Protestant murders are played down. I don't think they're completely denied. I could go on. Or the Irish people are said not to be Irish people sometimes if they're Protestant or if they're aristocratic, things like that. All the benefits have been connected to Great Britain are overlooked. Our enormous role in imperialism is overlooked, things like that. And people simply seem to assume that we would have had freedom of expression, trial by jury, parliamentary democracy and all the rest of that, even if we'd never been connected to Great Britain, which again is an unsafe assumption, because even looking at Europe, there were many authoritarian governments in the 19th century, well into the 20th century. So we can't simply think that we would definitely have developed these things for ourselves. We might have done, and perhaps I'm playing counterfactual history a little bit too much. So my point of view is not as unique as you might think. Now, there'd be no point in standing for Dáil Éireann, since certainly wouldn't win. If there were a poll in the Republic of Ireland about rejoining the UK, I wonder how many people would vote to do that. And I'm not lying to myself. I know it'd be very low, what it was 1 or 2%. But there are other models which could make it more attractive, such as what we'd have devolution within the United Kingdom, like Scotland's scenario, or something like that. Especially if it was, we'd be reuniting Ireland, so one Ireland devolved within the UK. How about becoming a Commonwealth realm, especially if that meant that Northern Ireland united with the south of Ireland? We could be the Dominion, like the Dominion of Ireland, a similar situation to Canada or Australia. There are many more things we could do. We could still have an elected presidency, make him an elected governor general. So I wonder if we were offering something like that, how many people would not be doctrinaire and say, yeah, we're open to that. And we could achieve the goal of a 32-county state. It's a goal that I share, actually. I just think we could also be united with Great Britain as well. I recall reading Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt, publishing sensation 20 years ago. You may not know what it is. McCourt grew up in Limerick in the Second World War, and in the 90s he was casting his mind back over 60 years. So Ireland at the time were considerably poorer than Great Britain, and nationalists and Republicans would have had us believe that poverty in Ireland was entirely down to our connection to Great Britain. So break the connection with England and all our problems would be solved at a stroke. It turned out to be completely bogus, and some indicators of life got worse, like life expectancy and things like that. So anyway, his father was working in the United States and returned from the United States to ERA in the 1930s. His father had been in the IRA in 1919 to 21, and then he wanted a government grant on this basis. Anyway, his father kept saying, the Irish Free State, is this what men fought and died for? We were better off under the English. And it was not a unique point of view. My great-grandmother was living in Limerick at the time, and even in the 50s she was saying, John Bull, why did you ever leave us? John Bull being a man who symbolises Great Britain, or perhaps just England. That's what lots of pubs called John Bull. And she was from a family that was vaguely nationalist in its outlook. My grandmother, not my great-grandmother, my grandmother now, being a child at the time of that conflict after the First World War, had a low opinion of the RIC, the Englishmen in the RIC, who are known by the opprobrious term black and tan. So typically nationalist outlook. Anyway, and McCourt in Angela's Ashes, he recalls how in Limerick there was a lot of prejudice against his father, who's from the north, because they say, blah, 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 he must be Presbyterian. He wasn't, he was a Catholic, but there was anti-Protestant bigotry down there. Of Of course, there was plenty of anti-Catholic bigotry in the north. Or if you read Dublin Made Me by C.S. Andrews, better known as Todd Andrews, he was a Fianna Fáil politician, talks about growing up in Dublin, born there in 1900, and how his uncle would pass an anti-Protestant remark if they ever walked near a Protestant church, or his nanny would spit on the ground every time they came near a Protestant church. And I'm not saying this to deny or overlook anti-Catholic prejudice. There was equally revolting anti-Catholic prejudice as well. But how widespread was it and how severe was it? This shouldn't be exaggerated. Sometimes it went no further than words. You might have read Joseph O'Connor, that's Sinead O'Connor's brother, his book, is it The World of the Irish Male? And he said, a well-known Dublin stock character in any pub is the chap who thinks we should beg the English to take us back, and blah, blah, blah. So we missed out on the Second World War. But De Valera, who was Taoiseach at the time, if you really believe that Northern Ireland is part of our state, why are you not defending Northern Ireland? It was in the Constitution passed in 1937. There was a low turnout and it was narrowly passed, so not really a ringing endorsement of his anti-partition campaign. So when the Luftwaffe bombed Belfast and killed 800 people, why didn't we declare war on the Third Reich? So we don't believe the North is part of our territory. Well, if we do, then we have to declare war on them. And I know the Crown Forces were there, all right? But they weren't killing anybody at all at that time. Later, there were clashes with the IRA. They killed very, very few people. This is another point, the hypocrisy of the Irish government. So Tommy Williams was involved in killing an RUC officer, Patrick Murphy, a Catholic officer who lived on the Falls Road. It was safe for a Catholic RUC officer to live on the Falls Road in the 40s. He was killed in a gunfight, not at home. But anyway, Tommy Williams was hanged for that. But there'd been a huge petition in the south of Ireland to save his life, and De Valera had been appealing for his life. But 6 IRA men were executed in the south during the Second World War by De Valera's government. And in Dev's case, these were more dubious cases. Who was it? Charlie Kerrins executed, and it was not alleged that he fired a gun or even was present at the time of the murder for which he was executed, and so on. Or there were hunger strikes in 1922 in the Irish Civil War. There were hunger strikes in the 1940s under De Valera. Okay, and IRA men were allowed to die by Irish governments. But when IRA men went on hunger strike in the north in the 70s and 80s, suddenly Dublin thought this was an outrage and these men's lives must be saved by the Crown giving in to them. So it was the most nauseating hypocrisy. Why is Dev not execrated for being evil by Republicans when Thatcher is? And Thatcher gave so much to these hunger strikers, these terrorists who were treated so humanely, better than in almost any other prison system in the world. It was staggering dishonesty and malice on behalf of the Republican movement. Anyway, so Arlene Foster, First Minister of Northern Ireland, I read an article about her some years ago, and she made a very valid point. She talked about Gaelic nationalism in the 19th century, and I thought, wow, that's it. It's hit the nail on the head. It really is Gaelic nationalism, it's not Irish nationalism. Gaelic Athletic Association. It's not called the Irish Athletic Association or the Gaelic League. It's not called the Irish League. So looking back to the Irish language, Gaeilge, and actually that's even derived from the Welsh word for raider, because we used to attack the west coast of Great Britain so much. So that's something we don't like to remember. Our pirates, that we enslaved people. Are we evil? No, of course we're not. All nations have enslaved other people. So nationalism from the 19th century was just looking at Irish culture from prior to the 19th century. And the Gaels were just the latest of several waves of invasion and immigration, which overlooking all the previous Celtic settlers in Ireland and all the people who come subsequently, like the Danes, the Anglo-Normans, the Cambro-Normans, and the Old English in the Middle Ages, and whoever else, and people who were Spanish, not many of them, Palatine Germans, Huguenots from France, Dutchmen under William of Orange, and on and on. And only looking at that one slice of time, so our culture could be preserved in aspect from then. So we are partly Gaelic, and it's an important part of our heritage and identity, but it's certainly not the only part. And we ought to embrace our heritage from before and after. Now, we know very little about from before the Gaels, because there are almost no written records. We have these largely mythical tales about what happened. So I realised that the Gaels are about the first thing that we know about properly. So a solely Gaelic vision of Ireland is narrow-minded and willfully blind, can be intolerant. It's singular, like the GAA not allowing English dancing and playing English sports. Thankfully, we've moved on from that, and members of the Crown Forces can join the GAA now. So Pearse said Ireland should be not merely free but Gaelic as well, not merely Gaelic but free as well. Well, I think Ireland we should be not merely British but free as well, and not merely free but British as well. So we are British, we ought to embrace that. It's not the denial of Irish identity, it's the fulfilment of it, looking to our roots and our kith and our kin in Great Britain as the people in our eastern neighbour. So many of them have Irish ancestry too, and our cultures are a melange, and we owe so much to each other, and we can live in amity and unity. Could be semi-devolved, but I think that's a brighter, happier and more peaceful future.